This is everything you need to know about the Triumph TF450C. Alright, hey guys, I'm Ryan Nitzen, and we just wrapped up our first ride on Triumph's all-new TF450C model. The C designates their cross-country race bike, and this bike jumps into a highly competitive class going up against the likes of the KTM XCF, the Honda RX, and the Yamaha FX lineup. I like to think of these X models as the most versatile bikes on the market. You can kind of do a little bit of everything with them. You can ride moto, you can ride off-road, you could race. It's kind of the full spectrum of what a dirt bike is designed to do. So for me personally, I think if there's one bike that I would own, the X model lineups are some of the most versatile bikes on the market. Now behind me, you'll see Triumph's TF450RC edition. This is the full-fledged motocross bike, but now we have spent time on this bike, the TF450E, which is the Enduro model, and now the C model, which is designated for more cross-country racing. Think GNCC, National Enduro, and National Grand Prix style racing. Now the new C model does come in a 450 and a 250 displacement class, but today we're going to be focusing on the 450. That's the bike that we spent the most amount of time riding in West Virginia at the newest segment of the Hatfield-McCoy trails. We rode the new Tornado tracks. It's a motorcycle only trail system, and it was a lot of fun, but we mainly spent our time on the TF450C model. The new Triumph TF450C comes in at an MSRP of $10,695, has a wet weight of 247 pounds, and a seat height of 37.4 inches. It's heavily based off the RC motocrosser and features nearly all of the same components that come on the motocross bike. You'll find a 5-speed transmission which produces 61.5 horsepower, dedicated XC mapping, launch control, quick shift, and traction control as standard. Inside the engine, you're going to find titanium valves with a 45-hour service life, and the new Triumphs have an Exetti brand clutch, which addresses some of the early issues they had with the early 2024 models. The gear selector star has also been updated to eliminate half shifts, and this is another update that they've implemented for current Triumph owners. They've done a really good job about implementing these updates, so if you have a Triumph model and you've experienced any issues, you can take the bike to the dealer and they will add this new gear selector star, the new clutch package. All these things Triumph I feel like has been really transparent about, and that's something that I think is really good for the new adopters to this brand. Now up front you have ODI lock-on grips, and you also have this cluster of electronics. You'll get traction control, quick shift, launch control, and a different mode switch. Now the difference between the two maps is the light off is always going to be the standard OEM map. The light on is going to be the softer map as standard, and if you choose to buy the $200 Wi-Fi module, you'll be able to add 4 different maps to this bike. The map that you select will always go into that light on mode. And so for this ride day, we had the softer map kind of programmed into that, and then the standard full power map as the light off or standard. If you were to add that $200 Wi-Fi module accessory to this bike, you would get 4 different maps to choose from, those being desert, fast woods, single track, or soft. Inside the ProTune Triumph app, you'll also have a full service life, real-time live data. You can add notes to your bike setup. You can see service intervals and all those things as well. So it's pretty cool that now these bikes are all coming pretty much with a smartphone app if you were to add that Wi-Fi module. At a 247-pound wet claimed weight, the TFC is 7 pounds more than the standard RC edition, but even with the extra weight, it's still the same as a stock CRF 450 or a Kawasaki KX 450. Just kind of goes to show how light the standard TF-RC model is. On the TF450C, you're going to find Dunlop tires. These are different than the Dunlop MX34s that come on the 450RC, and different than the Michelin Enduro 2 tires that you'll find on the Enduro bike. These are going to be the AT82s. These are an off-road tire with actually a switchable tread pattern. They're directional, so you can go forward or backwards being the scoop design, and that is what we rode on our ride day. The TF450C model has the same frame and swing arm as the 450RC motocross bike. The E model actually has a different swing arm, different linkage ratio, different shock springs. The 450C is very much based on the motocross bike. The biggest difference that you're going to see in terms of suspension is a softer spring out back and different settings up front, but you're still going to be running the KYB AOS front fork and a KYB shock out in the rear. In order to make this bike more geared for off-road riding, you're going to see that this bike has a kickstand as well as a 2.2 gallon fuel tank, which is larger than the 1.85 gallon fuel tank that comes on the motocross bike. This new fuel tank on the C is the same one that comes on the E model, so kind of a little bit of blending there. The C model also has a gripper seat with ribs, kind of like the RC edition behind me, where the E model just has a standard gripper seat with no ribs. Another nice touch is the handguards up front, as well as the full coverage skid plate down below. You're also going to get a full integrated linkage guard as well. That comes standard on the C model for extra protection and a little bit of extra coverage when you're out riding some off-road trails. There is no fan kit that comes on the C model. The fan kit does come standard on the E model. So basically this bike, the TF450C, is a lot similar to the TF450RC edition, which is the full-blown motocross bike. You're basically getting a fully blown motocross bike 5-speed transmission with different mapping and different suspension settings, instead of more of the Enduro model, which is a full-blown, softer, a little bit longer 6-speed transmission bike. The 450C is going to be very heavily based on the motocross bike with some slight changes to go off-road racing. So to kind of give you guys a little bit of background, a few weeks ago we rode the new TF450E, and at the time the TF450C was not available. And so my thoughts have kind of changed on the E model, because originally it was just the motocross bike and then the Enduro bike. And the Enduro bike was kind of more, they said competition off-road. So in a way I kind of pictured that bike as being the GNCC NGPC racer. But obviously that bike has a headlight, it has kind of the rear fin for a license plate and taillight. It's got a 6-speed transmission, a longer swing arm. So all of those things now have kind of changed in my mind. They had said that that bike goes up against something like the Honda RX or the Yamaha WR or the KTM XCFW, and now that all makes sense. So that bike is going to be more of like your dual sport, kind of trail ride bike, where now the TF450C is the full-on competition bike that's going to race in GNCC and NGPC. And like I said, that bike is kind of all the way over here. The motocross bike is kind of all the way over here. And now the C is kind of splits the difference right in between the two. You get the big tank, but you have a 5-speed transmission instead of a 6-speed. You have a kickstand, you have an 18-inch rear wheel, you have a little bit softer suspension settings, designated mapping settings. So it kind of splits the difference between the full-fledged motobike that we have here and the TF450E, which is like a full-blown enduro, almost a dual sport kind of bike, if that makes sense. So what's it like to ride? Well, we flew to West Virginia to ride the newest segment of the Hatfield-McCoy trail system. This is called the Tornado Tracks. It's a motorcycle-only facility. Super fun, really cool area to ride. They're really trying to draw more people into this area of the state to ride, and it's really cool. Even the governor or the mayor came, and they were showing us like just how excited they were to unveil these new tracks for us to ride. It rained a ton on us in the morning, so the tracks were really slippery and really greasy, had that kind of clumpy mud on top with a really hard clay base underneath. But it was really fun to try out the traction control and the different maps. Our bikes were set up with the Wi-Fi modules, so we could actually add different maps to the bike instead of just the standard and the soft. But I actually ended up using the soft and the single track different maps, as well as traction control. Later in the day I ended up going the full power mode, but I always kept the traction control on, and it was actually really fun to kind of see how this works in different conditions. So the motor on the Triumph is very, very smooth. The bottom end kind of comes on very linear and has a really good mid to top. But if you're looking for a bike that has, really nasty, strong torque like a 450, I don't think the Triumph is that bike. It's very smooth, it's very easy to ride, which I think a lot of guys are gonna like. It makes it very controlled, very fun to ride. Doesn't feel like it's gonna get out from underneath you. It's very controlled, and it puts the power from the throttle to the rear wheel in a very connected way. I never felt like this bike is too fast, like it's gonna get away from me. I could actually really turn the throttle on, and especially in the softer map with the traction control on, it almost kind of felt like a KTM 350. Very free revving, very lightweight engine feeling, but not a ton of bottom end. Like when you hit the gas, it doesn't want to lurch out from underneath you. But that middle to top end range is super strong. That's where this bike is its best attribute. It's the same thing I said for the TF450E model, the Enduro model. This bike just keeps pulling, and it has a very good mid-range. That's like my favorite part of this bike. I also have the quick shifter on, so when you're banging through second to third gear, super fun, super connected. Never feels like it's going to get out from underneath you. Like I said, I used the soft map in the early part of the day when the conditions were at their worst. But as the day progressed, I moved on to the single track map and then also the full power map. Like I said, always with the traction control on, just to keep that rear wheel to the ground. And the traction control and the quick shift on the Triumph work way better than any other bike in the class. I know the KTM comes standard with the quick shifter and the traction control as well. The quick shift on the KTM I don't like, just because when you shift, it actually drops the RPMs down a little bit, so you're like way up high, go to a shift, and it drops down again. The Triumph, I feel like as soon as you click it, it keeps you right in that RPM range that you started in when you shifted from second to third. So really smooth, really fun to ride this bike. Like I said, the conditions were really challenging, but this bike made it really easy to keep the power on the ground and stay on track. Kind of building on that 350-ish feeling, it definitely felt more than a 250, but not as much maybe as a full-blown 450. Obviously, we're turning the power down a little bit. It doesn't have as much grunt off the bottom like a normal 450, but it has that really strong, high revving, free feeling that I really like about the 350 in that mid-range. So definitely this bike is fun to ride, but very controlled and not something that's going to feel like too fast and it's going to get away from you. The chassis, the cockpit, the overall feeling of this bike as soon as you get on is super comfortable. I think it's one of the most adaptable bikes in the class. You can just get on it and right away you're like, wow, this feels so comfortable. It doesn't feel like the old kind of KTMs did where you feel like it's just all different. It doesn't feel like a Japanese bike. It just feels super kind of in between the two. Like you get on it, the lock-on bars, gripper seat, it feels very comfortable right out of the gate. The foot pegs are really sharp, so you don't feel like you're going to slip out on anything. And overall, like you just get on and right away you feel comfortable. The Brembo levers, you're able to adjust to your liking. So definitely props to Triumph on that for making this bike super comfortable right out of the box. The bike also feels really agile. On the trails that we rode, they're very tight. We're doing a lot of like connecting trails, so you'd be going really fast and have to cut in left or cut right to kind of make it onto the next trail. And this bike feels very agile. You can kind of move it around very easily. The way the tank sits and everything, it doesn't feel, extra tall or too big like some of the big desert tanks do. So you're able to move this bike around a lot easier than I expected. Some of these other bikes feel heavier. They feel with the more weight you're riding with. You feel that as you're moving the bike around. With the Triumph, at 247 pounds, it's the same weight as a stock Cowie or a stock Honda R or KX, the standard bike. So this bike actually doesn't feel too heavy when you're riding it, and you're able to kind of jump forward and stand up easily, being that tank kind of goes down lower rather than coming up higher. So this bike feels very comfortable. KYB suspension front and rear, probably the best in class as far as just overall comfort. It is a softer spring out in the back, so I had to crank the shock down a little bit more to get that sag. I also have noticed on the Triumph, I like it to be a little bit less sag, so a little bit more on the front wheel. And with these trails that we were riding, very tight switchbacks, you can kind of actually moto it in some sections where you kind of jump up forward and rail kind of the outside berm, so to say. And so I did the same thing. I've kind of learned that by riding the motocross bike behind me, is getting that sag number maybe to like 102 to 100 to kind of get it to be a little bit more front heavy. I've noticed that kind of the same thing on the trail bike worked really well as well. The Brembo front brake is arguably the best in class, and it works really good on the Triumph as well. Again, you can dial in the levers to get that really comfortable feel for the clutch and for the brake. No issues there. It's probably one of my favorite attributes of this bike, especially when we're coming down some of these steep sections where it's real slimy and greasy. I could really rely on the brakes without any fade. The only real issue I had from riding the new Triumph was this feeling of it flaming out. When you're going slow speeds and you give it some extra gas, it would almost feel like it's getting too much fuel and then it would stall. So I'm not really sure if this is a mapping issue, like if the bike is getting too much fuel and then it's causing it to die, or if it was just getting too hot maybe. But it was just another thing that I noticed, and like some of our other riders were talking about it too, like, man, my bike keeps kind of flaming out like this. I also noticed that it has no fan kit, and I know it's not like a major necessity, but especially in the slower speed stuff, I think that's something that they could have done with this bike, especially since it comes standard on the TFE model. I know it's an accessory, you guys can obviously add that onto this bike, but yeah, those are just the two little things I noticed. Was that flame out was really kind of annoying at the end of the day. I kind of messed with the clutch to make sure I was getting the full pull, like the bike was fully disengaging. But something I noticed, and then when I went to restart it, I don't know, like again, maybe it was too hot and it was kind of like, before it would fire again. It wasn't just a super quick touch and fire, maybe. So yeah, I don't know, just something to think about. I don't know if we can get in there and kind of mess with the mapping and maybe give it a little bit less fuel, if that would solve it. But I think if you own this bike, you'd be able to really fine tune it and get a good feel to kind of eliminate that issue. I also feel like the 6-speed transmission would have been a nice touch on this bike. I know the 6-speed comes standard on the KTM XCF as well as the Yamaha FX. And in this kind of X market, you see manufacturers really trying hard, and then you kind of see manufacturers trying not so hard, maybe with like the KXX. It doesn't even have a big tank, just kind of has 18-inch rear wheel, kickstand, and a little bit softer suspension settings. The Triumph, I feel like, is somewhere in the middle, right? It's heavily based on the motocross bike, 5-speed transmission, motocross chassis, everything like that. There's dedicated mapping, it has a big tank, has a kickstand. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. It's not like they didn't try at all, but maybe on the KTM or the Yamaha, they really tried and put a lot of extra effort into it. I feel like the Triumph kind of splits right in the middle. They do have the E and they do have the RC. So if you think about it, like, it's very just kind of that cut right in the middle, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I feel where this bike lands in terms of the overall market as well as Triumph's lineup. Overall, this bike was super comfortable to ride and I felt very at home right away. Obviously, I've spent time now on all 3 of the full-size Triumph models, and I feel if you want a smooth handling power character with all the goodies like traction control and quick shift, then the Triumph is definitely a bike you're going to want to check out. It also comes in the TF450 model, the 250cc. I think if you're somebody who's going to do some off-road racing like GNCC or NGPC, you're likely not going to want to start out on a full-fledged motocross bike, and you're probably not going to want to ride something like a WR, a Honda X, or even the TF450E model, which is the full-blown Enduro. So the TF450C kind of splits that difference and gives you a viable option if you're going to be an off-road racer on a Triumph. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks to Triumph for having us out, and thank you to the whole Hatfield McCoy trail system for letting us come and ride your trails. It was totally a great time, and definitely suggest if you're out in that area to go check those trails out. Until then, always check out the Cycle News magazine. You'll find a full test on this bike as well as a ton of others, including racing news, interviews, everything you need to know in the two-wheel world. You'll find that at cyclenews.com, totally for free. And until next time, thanks guys for watching. We'll see you out there.